Hello and welcome to today's meeting of Democrats of Greater Tucson. My name is Larry Bodine and I'm the president of Democrats of Greater Tucson. And I will be your host today. And with me, as you can see, is Daniel Hernandez Jr. Daniel, how are you?
Hey, Larry, so much. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's a great audience. You're talking to Democrats, so it's a friendly audience. I'll get back to you in just a second, Daniel. I want to first go over a few housekeeping items. One is that this is a webinar program, so it's designed as a security measure to only display the host and the speaker. You won't see your face or other people's faces because all that video slows down and eats up the bandwidth. However, Daniel and I really want you to ask questions. And there's two great ways you can do that. One is look at the top of your screen and you should see a link that says raise your hand. And when we get to questions, what I'll do is call on you and unmute you and you can ask your question live, just like at the live meetings. Or if you would like me to ask a question for you, simply type it in at the bottom of your screen where you see Q&A. So you slide your mouse down to the bottom and you see the Q&A. And so with that, let me give a hearty welcome to Daniel Hernandez. He is a Democratic state representative for Legislative District 2, which covers Southeast Pima County and Santa Cruz County. He has been an effective lawmaker fighting for our progressive values. In fact, he led a coalition to repeal the anti-LGBTQ no Promo Homo law. Daniel also was able to secure more than $3 million in urgently needed funds to keep the doors open at the Santa Cruz Valley Regional Hospital in Green Valley. In 2019, he was able to secure $20 million for school counselors and for social workers at our public schools. And with that, Daniel, welcome to the program. Take it away.
Hey, Larry, thank you so much. It's great to see so many familiar names since I can see your faces. I've had the honor of serving as the state representative for District Number 2 for the last 4 years, and I'm running for a third term. I know a lot of you, but just as a little bit of background on me, prior to serving in the Arizona State House, I served from 2011 through 2019. So the first couple of years that I was in the legislature, I also simultaneously served on the Sunnyside Unified School District Governing Board. So for me, public education has been one of my top priorities, making sure that we really look at how do we provide the resources for our children to be able to be successful and get a world-class education, but also making sure that we're providing a strong working environment that's safe and supportive for all the staff, from the janitors all the way to the teachers and the principals. Because if we don't have a good working environment for our staff, we're not going to have a good learning environment for our teachers. I started very quickly seeing what was going on in our public schools. So when I graduated from high school in 2008, I saw that there was a strong need to have strong advocates in the Sunnyside School District. And in 2011, 3 short years after I graduated from high school, I ran and won a seat in the Sunnyside Unified School District Governing Board. For me, advocacy and making sure that I'm a voice for those who oftentimes don't have a voice at decision-making tables has been really important. So I've been leading on issues that are really near and dear to my heart. So gun violence prevention, looking at public education funding, and also making sure that I'm working towards making sure that people in the LGBTQ community and the Latino community have strong representation and making sure we're putting in laws in place to better their lives. So the last 4 years, I've had the honor of serving with my friend, Senator Andrea D'Alessandro, who's running for the House, and we've had a wonderful opportunity to work together to get things done. And I want to talk a little bit about what I've been able to accomplish in the State House. It's been a very odd time at the Arizona State Capitol. That joke, it's been the best of times, it's been the worst of times, I think really applies to the Arizona State House, because even though we're at a record 31-29 split with only 2 seats separating the Republicans from the Democrats, we've seen almost no bipartisanship. And when there has been bipartisanship, I've been one of the leaders in bringing people together to actually get results done. So I want to talk specifically about something that Larry brought up, which was really important for me. In Arizona public schools in 1991, we passed a law that said that because of the LGBTQ community having higher rates of HIV and AIDS, we could no longer teach or talk about the LGBTQ community. This was a law that was, affectionately known as no promo homo. And a lot of people always ask me, well, what does that actually mean? It meant that your public school funding could become in jeopardy if you talked about the LGBTQ community in a way that could be perceived as promoting an alternative lifestyle. It also said in that law that there was no safe way to be an openly gay, lesbian, or bisexual or transgender person. So it effectively made it a community that was ignored and erased. So people couldn't even talk about Harvey Milk, because talking about Harvey Milk being a civil rights icon could be interpreted as you promoting homosexuality. So this was a law that went into place in 1991, back when we were in the height of the AIDS pandemic. And we saw that there were a lot of people who didn't understand what was going on. We didn't have the science. And because of that, we saw that a lot of people were scared. So this law went into place in 1991, and it wasn't until 2009 when I was able to build a coalition and take advantage of a couple of factors that were going in our direction. The first was there was a lawsuit that was challenging the law, saying that kids were being hurt because they weren't learning effective strategies to prevent HIV and AIDS, because they were being told that there was no safe sex for those communities. But also the Attorney General, Republican, saying he wouldn't defend this lawsuit in court anymore. So when that happened, I was able to bring the business community, Republicans and Democrats, and in a 51-9 vote in the House, we repealed this anti-LGBTQ law. And 55-5 vote in the House, so overwhelmingly bipartisan, and then in the Senate, 21-9. We were able to repeal this law that was an important step for the LGBTQ community here in Arizona. Fighting for those values has been something that I've always been really known for. Fighting for the LGBTQ community. I helped start the LGBTQ caucus here in the state of Arizona for the legislature, and also fighting for civil rights and reproductive rights. I helped, when I was running for office in 2016, run the National Latino Outreach Program for Planned Parenthood called the RAIZ program. And after I left Planned Parenthood and started serving in the legislature, reproductive rights and women's rights was another top priority. Over the last couple of years, we've seen attempts to chip away at women's reproductive rights and the right to abortion. For me, that's been something that's been really awful to see happening over the last couple of years, but I've been helpful and really critical in helping stop some really bad things from happening. Last year, there was an attempt to give about $7.5 million to what are called crisis pregnancy centers. These are fake healthcare centers that don't actually provide healthcare for women. They're usually run by far right-wing conservative Christian organizations to discourage women from having abortions. But after they discourage women from having an abortion, they do nothing to actually help provide healthcare. They don't actually provide services. It's basically, we care about the baby until it's born, and then you're on your own. And there was $7.5 million that were going to go to these crisis pregnancy centers. And once again, I used the relationships that I've built over the last 12 years of going up to the Capitol as an advocate and now as a representative to get 2 Republican women to join us on the Democratic side to vote against this funding. So that meant that we stopped $7.5 million from going to a slush fund for a conservative Christian organization that wouldn't have actually provided healthcare. So it's been a lot of stopping bad things for the last couple of years. But now we're starting to see, especially with the repeal of no promo homo, that we've been able to actually move forward, repealing of bad policy and moving forward with policy. The last 3 years, I've introduced a bipartisan piece of legislation that would provide protections for the LGBTQ community in housing, employment, and also in public accommodations. Thankfully, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled just a couple weeks ago that non-discrimination laws for employment are no longer necessary, because there is a federal law that says that if you are a member of the LGBTQ community, you cannot be fired for any reason related to being LGBTQ. That was a big win. But in Arizona, we still have a lot of issues where people are denied housing, and public accommodations doesn't just mean being denied the ability to buy a cake from a baker. It means being able to potentially be denied healthcare in our hospitals and our clinics. So that's something that I'm going to continue to work on, and I've been able to build a coalition and actually have bipartisan support We've had over 3,000 businesses that have signed in support of this legislation. So I'm someone that builds bridges and builds coalitions. The last thing I want to talk about is education spending, and I really want to take as many questions as possible because that's always my favorite part of DGT. For me, education has been really important because my sisters and I have all been very lucky that we were able to get not just a great education at Sunnyside high schools, but also going to the University of Arizona and ASU. All three of us have been able to get quality educations that have then allowed us to be able to pursue careers in public service. So Alma just finished her master's in public health 2 years ago and is looking at starting a second master's. I finally got my math class done, so I'm waiting for the official word that my bachelor's is official from the University of Arizona, and my sister Consuelo finished at ASU in global health. So education has been critical, and it's key to us being successful because we were first generation college students. But when we see the spending that has happened in education for the last couple of years, I personally saw the firsthand impact of cuts happening from the state level. In Sunnyside, while I was a member of the board, we had to cut about $8 million, including the year that I was president when I had to cut about $2.5 million. And I can tell you, as someone who has been on the school board for years and has had to talk to the students, the parents, the teachers, the classified employees, the certified employees, there is nowhere else to cut. We cannot continue to starve an education system, lack sufficient teachers in our classrooms, increase the number of students in the classroom, and expect everybody to be successful. When I was president of the Sunnyside School Board, we did a couple of things that were really important, but the biggest one was a compensation study to see where our staff was being paid compared to their colleagues. And what we found out was that in Sunnyside, more than half of our staff was making 25% or more less than their colleagues in other districts. So when we would train people like bus drivers and nurses, what would they do? They would get hired somewhere else and get paid up to 20% more. And that was a big problem because we couldn't retain the quality staff that we needed for our kids in one of the highest needs communities because we weren't paying them enough. So we were able to make some adjustments to try and compensate staff appropriately, but at the same time juggling almost $2.5 million in cuts. So when I came to the legislature, I immediately started working on creative ways to try and help our public education system. Last year, I was able to work with Republican colleagues, and here's the funny thing. I voted against the budget because it didn't go far enough, but I was still able to get a lot of things in there that were really helpful and really important, including $20 million to a school grant program where school districts and charters could apply and say, we want money for a social worker, we want money for a counselor or a school resource officer. These school safety grants were originally proposed at $2 million, and I was able to work with Republicans and Democrats to get it up to $20 million a year. The sad thing was, once we put out the application and the State Department of Education got requests, there were $98 million worth of requests, but enough funding for only $20 million. We know that having counselors and social workers is an important part of creating a safety net and a wraparound service that actually protects our students. The other thing that I've been working on is accelerating the funding for district additional assistance. So district additional assistance is the money that school districts get from the state that allows them to actually make the decisions at the local level for what they need. So instead of us hamstringing school districts and saying, we're only going to give you money for this project or that project, it's money that goes directly to districts. And last year, we were able to get $68 million in the budget that provide additional district additional assistance for teachers and for staff and for all school districts. So we still have a long way to go when it comes to public education funding, but I've been successful in getting additional dollars that otherwise would not have gone there to make sure that we're providing additional resources for some of the lowest income and the highest needs communities in the state of Arizona. So I'm running for re-election because I'm someone who's been an effective policymaker by doing things like repealing no promo homo, creating a law to protect sexual assault victims in my first term, and working across the aisle to get solutions, and really making sure that we're promoting our democratic values, even if it means, doing so in an environment where we're in the minority. We're poised to take the majority for the first time since the 1960s. I'm excited about the possibility of serving in a majority for the first time ever, but also being able to take the skills that I've had of negotiating, making deals, and bringing results back to the district if we take the majority. If we take the majority, it looks like we will still continue to have a Republican governor and potentially a Republican state Senate. So we're going to need solution driven folks at the Capitol who can work together to get stuff done. The last thing that I'll mention, and then I'll start taking questions, Larry, is during the last couple of years, we've seen that Southern Arizona and rural communities have not received the things that they need. So we see economically depressed areas in our district all the time, places like Nogales, places like Green Valley, where there is not the kind of economic development that we're seeing in places like Tempe or Mesa or Phoenix. And a lot of that is tied directly to the lack of investments being made by the state. So when we're looking at doing things like tax credits, I've been urging businesses and companies that are coming to Arizona to look outside of the Phoenix metro area and really look at Tucson, Sahuarita, Green Valley, and Nogales as potential hubs for them to be able to grow their businesses. South Tucson has surprisingly had some success recruiting businesses to come to their vacant warehouses because of their tax environment, where they were working with companies to provide a favorable environment. But it's not enough to just rely on the cities and towns to do that. We at the state level need to make sure that whenever we are trying to entice new businesses to come in, we're not just placing them in the valley. We're looking at the entirety of the state of Arizona, particularly places like Nogales, which has one of the lowest average incomes in the state and has so many people that are out of work. And this is pre-COVID. Now that we're in COVID, we're seeing that critical access hospitals, critical access health centers are not getting the kind of funding that they need. So that's why in the last couple of months, I've been able to work to successfully get $1 million for the Holy Cross Hospital in Nogales to help them make repairs and to make transitions so that they have more reverse airflow rooms, provide adequate staffing at that hospital because it's the only hospital in Santa Cruz County. And also, when we heard that the Green Valley Hospital, the Santa Cruz Valley Regional Hospital, was on the verge of closing down due to lack of funds because the governor had put a prohibition on the thing that was their biggest moneymaker, which was elective surgeries, I was able to team up with multiple people to make sure that we got $3.5 million from the state in an initial payment, $6.5 million from the federal government through Medicaid advance payments, and then also in the last couple of weeks, an additional $1.5 million from the state. So making sure that our hospitals, which are overwhelmed right now because of COVID, are having the resources that they need to help try and take care of the communities here in Southern Arizona. So I see a couple of questions, Larry, so I'll hand it off to you to go ahead and get us started with the questions.
All right, Daniel. We've got a number of questions. So just a reminder, if you want to ask a question live, just simply click the button to raise your hand. Lucy, I'm coming to you in just a second. And also you can ask a question in the Q&A and I'll ask it of Daniel. So let's see. Okay, Lucy, I'm making it so that you can, you should be able to talk.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
Okay. Hi, Daniel.
Hey, Lucy, how are you?
I'm well. I have a question for you. It's kind of a two-parter, but as you know, we've heard that the legislature may well go into special session for the COVID-19 pandemic, but I'm wondering if there's any chance that there could be a special session included for the situation regarding our public schools and returning this fall.
Yeah. So thank you, Lucy, for that question. So I think I'm actually hearing a little bit differently than what everybody expected to be hearing. There was a lot of rumors that we'd be coming in for a special session before the end of the year. But what's happening is right now, I think because Governor Ducey is so concerned about Democrats being able to take the majority, but also being able to potentially draw a contrast because their plans are not the kind of plans that we would put into place to protect teachers, staff, and students. They don't want to come into session and have us use that as a platform to draw a contrast right before the election of what we would want to do as Democrats. So what's happening is I'm hearing that we may not have a special session at all until after the general election, which is in November. That's really disappointing and really concerning because when we look at that, we know that this is something that we cannot wait. Public schools, particularly those that have staff that are over 60, which about a quarter of our staff in public schools from the numbers that I've seen are over the age of 60 in a higher risk category. We don't have the ability to just shoot from the hip and kind of, create a plan as we're doing it. We have to have plans in place, and there's no amount of hand sanitizer that you can buy for a school district that will ensure that we have adequate social distancing, that we have adequate steps in place to protect the staff and the students. Because when you look at a classroom that has 35 or 40 students, it's something that's really problematic because there's not enough airflow. You're not able to make sure that people are doing what we can to protect folks. So I'm unfortunately not hearing that we're going to come back in a special session. The governor, along with Kathy Hoffman a couple of weeks ago, now about 2, announced that we were delaying the opening of schools by 2 weeks and that they were putting in money for different things that school districts can apply for and buy, and providing additional funds to try and help hold school districts whole as much as possible. But that's not the adequate answer. We need to come back in a special session, and we need to make sure that we change the way that we fund our public schools during this pandemic so that school districts don't feel the need to have to be in person to make sure that people are getting the funding that they are so desperately in need of. So that's a thing that I think is really concerning, that the special executive orders that the governor and Kathy Hoffman announced are not going to go far enough to protect school districts, teachers, and students, because we need to come in and do legislative changes to the way that we fund our schools, because otherwise a lot of school districts are going to have to make the choice of having to open up to make sure that they get that ADM, that average daily membership.
Yes, thank you. I was sort of afraid that was the answer. Thanks.
Of course.
Thank you, Lucy. Now we're going to come over to Lillian Fox, who would like to ask a question. So I'm clicking on your audio. You should be able to speak. You may want to unmute yourself. Take a look at the bottom left of your screen and make sure you can unmute yourself.
Okay, if you can hear me, I'm unmuted.
Hey, Lillian, we can hear you.
Okay, Daniel, my question is related to Lucy's question. My district is opening virtually, and I think they're going to stay virtual until it's safe, I hope, anyway. But that only solves part of the problem. Teachers will get paid as a result of that, but the hourly employees who are very poorly paid, who are on 9.5-month contracts, will not be paid. That means almost none of our bus drivers will be paid. Almost none of our food service workers will be paid. Our teachers' aides won't be paid. Our school monitors won't be paid. Most of the office staff and schools won't be paid, and they cannot live on air while the schools are operating virtually. Something needs to be done to help them. And I don't know what you can do, but I hope you have some ideas, and we'll keep these employees in mind, because they're, in my district at least, they're long-time, very loyal employees, and you can't run a physical school without them.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Lillian. As I mentioned, I was a member of the school board for a long time, so I know firsthand how important it is that we have all of the support staff and all of the ancillary staff continuing to have work. Like you mentioned, these are folks that don't get paid on a salary. They get paid hourly. It's a big problem that we need to come back and address through a special session. There are a couple of things that we can do. There are some concerns that I think we could deal with later on. But one of the concerns that's been brought up is because of something called the gift clause in the Arizona State Constitution, we can't pay people for not doing work. And I think that in a pandemic and during a critical time like we're in now, there has to be reasonable ways for us to try and be able to compensate those employees and either have them work later on or figure out something else that they can do. The problem is when we say we're shifting to a virtual environment, how do you become a virtual cafeteria worker? How do you become a virtual janitor? A lot of the folks that are in these positions, and I know many of them because I served for years and I was always constantly engaging with school district employees, particularly those that were in some of the fields that you don't often think about. So the janitors, the food service folks, the nurses, these are all folks that are not necessarily treated the same way as teachers, so they're not guaranteed pay for anything. And these are folks that are, I think, in the highest risk categories. A lot of the time we see a lot of folks that are retired, a lot of folks that are older, a lot of folks with pre-existing conditions that are working in these jobs. So I think coming in and doing a special session after the election, unfortunately, is what I'm hearing, but advocating so that people who are hourly employees start receiving the kind of payment that they would normally receive during an average school year and tiding them over until we get to a point where it's safe to them come back to work in person. There are a couple of other things that we can do kind of in the short term that I think are also important. So the Arizona Center for Economic Progress came out with a report and a letter that was signed by many different organizations. And some of the things that were included in there were simple common sense things. So in Arizona right now, if you are on unemployment, you are only eligible for $248 a week from the state of Arizona, making Arizona one of the worst weekly beneficiaries, one of the lowest amounts that beneficiaries are eligible to get in the country. Even Texas, which is also a conservative state, has almost double what people can make per week. So what we're seeing is people are out of work and not receiving adequate pay. But on top of that, the unemployment benefits that they're eligible for are not enough to be able to pay for their basic needs. While we saw a $600 increase from the federal government through the pandemic unemployment assistance program, that expires in July. And there has not been an attempt to re-up the program, at least not yet. And because of the way that things are happening in Congress, particularly with Mitch McConnell in charge of the Senate, and that's why we need to elect Mark Kelly to help get rid of Mitch McConnell as the majority leader in the Senate, we are not seeing the movement to do a second stimulus payment or to increase pandemic unemployment assistance programs through not just July, but potentially through the end of the year. So step one, to try and help not just these workers, but anybody who is potentially in a high-risk category who cannot safely return to work, I think is increasing the weekly benefit from the state of Arizona. That's something that the legislature could do right now, but it would require a law change. So instead of 248, Senator Sinema has proposed that we double it. And I think I agree with her. And that's one of the big reasons why I've been pushing that we increase the $248 a week to $500 a week, or exactly double, so that people are making enough money to be able to sustain themselves and their families. Second, if people find some kind of work, that we don't penalize them. So the way that our system works for unemployment in Arizona is really backwards, where there is a disincentive. So if someone can find something else to make a little bit of extra money, if they go past a certain amount of dollars that they earn per week, they become monetarily ineligible, even if they would have still been receiving, $600 from the pandemic unemployment assistance program, or additional money from the $248 weekly payout. We need to make it so that people, if they take another job where they are able to do things safely and they're not necessarily in a school environment, they're not being held, to consequences and then losing out potentially on money that they need for themselves and their families. So those are some simple steps that we can take. I think if there is a potential challenge with the Arizona Constitution with the gift clause, right now during the pandemic, we need to figure out how we loosen or work around that, because these are folks that are a critical part of our school. So when we do reopen fully in person, they need to be back to work, but we can't expect them to just wait without receiving adequate payment. And if they're not getting it from unemployment because we're not paying them enough through unemployment and they're not getting paid from the school district, these people will literally start losing their homes, will not be able to buy food, will not be able to pay for simple and basic needs that they have. And that's where I think we need to work harder to fix our state unemployment system. I hope that kind of answers some of your questions.
I have one more thing I wanted to say relative to that. Do you think you can get around the gift clause by spreading their 9.5 month payments over 12 months? And that would give you an excuse to start paying them, although it wouldn't be their full amount.
I think that's a great question. And that's one of the things where we're looking at how do we work together to try and get as many different creative ideas together. We can't ask a janitor to work virtually. So what other things could we have them do that wouldn't put them at risk? So that's where I've been talking to a lot of experts in school finance and also to a lot of folks that are legal experts on how do we get around the gift clause. But heck, even if it is a problem with the gift clause, let's put it and have somebody sue us, because I'd rather that we take care of folks now instead of trying to, play this game and put people at risk because they are not able to stay at home and are required to come back to work because they have no other options.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've got a bunch of questions, starting with our board member, Susie Anderson asks, Daniel, with whom have you built your best coalitions to get things done in Southern Arizona?
Yeah, So I've been a member of the legislature for the last 4 years, and I think the biggest and the most interesting coalition that I've built recently in Southern Arizona was trying to get the funding for Santa Cruz Valley Regional Hospital. The money that the hospital was getting isn't coming from a lot of traditional sources for hospitals. They're a hospital that has a really high elderly population, so they get a lot more Medicare payments than they do get Medicaid payments, which is the health insurance for low-income communities and low-income people. So what was happening is the governor put into place the restriction that you couldn't do elective surgeries, which is where a lot of their money came in from. We were telling folks, especially those that were in the highest risk category, don't go out. So people weren't going out to restaurants, weren't driving, they weren't getting hurt, weren't getting sick to the same numbers. Or if they were getting sick, they were making the decision that it doesn't seem worth the risk to go into a hospital and wait in an emergency room when I have a minor scrape or a minor bruise or a minor thing that I can just live with. So we were seeing record numbers of people not coming into the ER. We were seeing tons of people who were getting sick and staying at home because they didn't want to contract COVID. So I talked to the CEO, Adams, and he said that they had enough money to pay for 2 additional weeks of payroll. And the hospital was literally on the verge of closing down. So when I heard that, I immediately started reaching out to different folks. The first call that I made was to Senator Kirsten Sinema to see what could we do. And that's where she told me about some of the work that had already been done at the federal level through critical access hospitals, which are hospitals that serve rural communities. Unfortunately, because the hospital in Green Valley was built 29 miles away and not 35 miles away from the next nearest hospital, they didn't actually qualify as a rural access hospital. And because of that tiny little distinction at the federal level, they weren't eligible for the same kind of relief that things like Holy Cross were. So then I had to start getting creative. I started reaching out to folks in the business community, having them write letters in support of the hospital. And we were able to get about 25 different businesses and leaders across Southern Arizona to write letters in support of getting additional funds. And we were able to get money from the federal government, but the money from the federal government is a loan that has to be repaid, and it wouldn't actually address the current crisis that the hospital is going through. So with 3 days left before their final payroll went out and they ran out of money, I was able to kind of piggyback off the work that had been done by Senator D'Alessandro in the Senate to convince Governor Doug Ducey to give a forgivable and actually just a grant to the hospital instead of yet another loan. So they got $100,000 as a loan and $3.5 million as a grant to actually keep that facility open. They're bringing together the business community, Senator Sinema, Governor Ducey, Senator D'Alessandro, and countless others to try and put the pressure on Ducey to actually fund this hospital to prevent it from closing down during the middle of a pandemic. I think that's the most recent. I have tons of examples. You know, coming in as a gay Latino to the state legislature, I don't have a ton of power. I'm always building relationships and trying to find ways to get things done for our community. A lot of the times as a legislator, what I have found is I may not be able to get 100% of what I want, but if I can do something incrementally and come back later, I'll do that, because it's better that we get 10%, 20%, 30%, or in some cases, 60 or 70% of what we want than having a total loss. And unfortunately, because the legislature has been under Republican control almost unilaterally since the 60s, there hasn't been a lot of opportunities for us to get stuff done unless we're creating these relationships and these coalitions. But we are on the verge of taking the majority for the first time since the 60s, and I think we will definitely take the majority in the House and potentially also in the state Senate. So I hope that kind of answers your question, but for me, coalition building is second nature. It's something that I do constantly, because as the person from Tucson who's coming in, who doesn't have a ton of power on my own, I have to build those relationships and provide leverage so we can get stuff done.
All right, thank you very much. We now have a question from our board members, Steve and Christina Early. And they say, thanks for being here, Daniel. This is a local question concerning a local issue. We would like to know, what do you think about removing the Poncho Via statue in the park in downtown Tucson? You know,
I think there are so many different things going on right now in Arizona and across the country where we're looking at things that we took for granted. So looking at things like statues that have been around for either a long time or, you know, the last half century or so, and they've become fixtures in our community. But a lot of people didn't really dig into, why is this something that we have up? What is this symbol that's actually honor? What is this supposed to honor? What is this supposed to signify? And what we're seeing is that there are people who are really concerned because we're seeing Confederate statues that have been up in a lot of places. We even have some at the Arizona State Capitol. So while this isn't specifically in my district, I think it's an interesting conversation to be having, and I think we need to listen to more. I quite frankly didn't have an opinion on this. I'm learning, I'm reaching out to more folks, but I think we're seeing that there is a moment in time right now with the Black Lives Matter movement, with what's happening around the country, with our civil unrest, where people are saying, why are these things that we're choosing to honor somebody or an idea, why are these things that are up? And in asking that, I think it's important that we have conversations about all of these statues. We just saw a little bit of a controversy that, you know, Larry was a part of and did some media around the blue line and the white premises potentially. So I think we really need to look at symbols and who they are, why they're up. The Poncho Via statue is one that, you know, I think we need to have a conversation as a community in Tucson, and I don't know exactly, you know, what are the reasons why people would want to keep it up. We have, you know, the statue of Kino, which is off of Kino, ironically enough, as well, that I know some people are concerned about because of the way that the missionaries came in and really tried to convert the Native American community forcibly in a lot of ways. So I think having these community conversations is important. I need to learn more about the issue before I, you know, have a strong position either way. I think it can be problematic, but I do want to make sure that we're listening to as many folks in the community before we take some of these down. But we really need to have this conversation because we have symbols that are honoring the South and the Confederacy, which is not something that I think is an important Arizona or democratic value in 2020.
All right, thank you, Daniel. We have a question from Rigo Estrella, who wants to know, why is a big corporation like Walmart putting their money into you?
Thanks, Larry. I'm not sure what he's referring to, but I think for me, one of the big things, I'm trying to see the question, sorry. So specifically Walmart, I've been able to raise money for the last couple of years, and I'm really proud to have built a coalition. I've raised almost $300,000 in my last 2 runs and in this final run for the House. So for me, regardless of where the money is coming from, I still hold true to my democratic values. That's why I'm proud to be supported by the Teamsters, by the pipes fitters, by the nurses union, by also folks like the building trades and LIUNA. So for me, getting support from people doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with them. I have Republican supporters and donors. I have Democratic supporters and donors. And just because I've received a check from someone doesn't mean that I'm automatically going to do what they tell me. But for me, the important thing is, how are we bringing people together to try and create more economic development opportunities so that people have a livable wage and are able to earn a living? That's why I was a supporter of the workers at ASARCO. I went down there and spent tons of time and money trying to support the workers from the Teamsters and the steel workers, trying to make sure that we're taking care of those who are on strike. So for me, you know, I'm proud to have built a broad coalition. I've had over 1,000 donors in the last 2 years that have donated to my campaign. I don't really think I've received any contributions from Walmart, but I can double check. But for me, I'm proud to have the support that I've received because it shows that I'm able to build a large coalition and able to work together with many different people, even those that I don't agree with, to get stuff done for Southern Arizona.
We have another question. This one is from Amy Graves, and she says, "Thank you very much for speaking with us today. Please tell us your position on allowing a one-time exception to allow citizens initiatives like Outlaw Dirty Money have its signatures that are collected this year count towards 2022?
Right. I think, Amy, thank you so much for that question. There are a lot of problems that I think were kind of brought to fore during this current pandemic. And one of the biggest ones was the way that we have really made it difficult for citizens to be able to get things on the ballot. So there is no reason other than Republican intransigence that we couldn't allow people to collect signatures for ballot initiatives online. If we can collect them for federal candidates, for state candidates, there is no reason that you couldn't also sign a petition like Outlaw Dirty Money or Invest in Ed. So I think for me, I would be supportive of carrying over any signatures as long as they were collected, before a certain date, to count towards any future attempts to introduce the same exact language in 2022 or 2021. I think we also, as Democrats, need to say, okay, if we can't get it through just as an initiative, maybe we can do a ballot referral as legislators, especially if we take the majority, because that's something that we as Democrats can do. We can say, we're going to take the language from Invest in Ed or Outlaw Dirty Money if one of them doesn't make it on the ballot, because it looks like Outlaw Dirty Money is not going to be able to make it on the ballot this year, and say, we're going to take this language, and instead of it being a citizen-led initiative, we're going to put it on the ballot as a legislature and refer it to voters. And that's another tool that we can use. So I would be fully supportive of allowing any signatures that were already collected to be counted towards the future passage of something like Outlaw Dirty Money. I supported Outlaw Dirty Money. I still think it's a good idea. Going back to the question right before this, the more disclosure that we have, the more transparent that we are with our campaign finance laws, the better we all are.
Thank you. We have a question from Molly McCasson. She says, Daniel, thank you for being here. Do you think that the state law that prohibits political subdivisions in Arizona from requiring the license or registration of firearms and ammunition, could that be removed from the books? If not, what are the ways do you suggest for preventing prohibited buyers from getting their hands on guns in Pima County?
Thanks, Molly, for that question. So obviously, because of what happened with Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, for me, gun violence prevention has been an issue that I've been really keyed into and really a part of for a long time. I'm the only candidate that's been endorsed in Southern Arizona by Moms Demand Action. They have two different things. They have a distinction, which means you filled out their survey and answered the questions that they agree with, but the actual endorsement has only gone to myself and Representative Longden. We're the only gun violence survivors running for office in Arizona, so we are the first to get endorsed. So I work partner with Moms Demand Action in Everytown for Gun Safety very regularly. The Center to Prevent Gun Violence for Brady also just endorsed me. So I think there are ways that we can make sure that we prohibited possessors from having access to firearms. So the first thing that we need to do, and this is one that we've been working on for a long time, but because of Republicans being in the majority, we haven't even been able to get a hearing on these bills. Step one would be background checks for all gun sales. Right now in Arizona, you are not required to go through a licensed gun dealer if you're buying a firearm and it's not considered, a sale that's being done in a licensed gun dealer shop. So if you go to a gun show, there's no requirement for that. If you buy it online, if you buy it from an individual, there is no current requirement that you go through a background check unless you're at a federally licensed gun dealer. That's the problem. Secondly, we need to get rid of some of the preemption laws that prohibit local communities like Pima County, like the city of Tucson, like Nogales, from being able to put in measures at the city and county level, because the state keeps preempting laws. We have a lot of laws that have to do with preemption that I think once we take the majority, we need to get rid of, including things like plastic bag bans in Arizona because of Republican lawmakers' pet projects, getting annoyed with folks in places like Tempe from banning plastic bags at their grocery stores. They put in a ban that they couldn't put in a ban for plastic bags. So there's a lot of preemption that we need to address and really get rid of. So I think what we need to do once we take the majority is really look at a 5 to 10 year plan on what are the laws that we need to repeal or replace, but then also how are we going to partner, because we're still going to have a Republican governor most likely. So how are we going to get stuff done in the first 2 years, knowing that we'll likely have a barrier with Doug Ducey being the governor? And then how do we get ready to take the governorship in 2022? So how do we as Democrats work together to prepare so that we have a strong footing for a Democrat to become governor in 2022, who will actually sign all of the laws, like things like background check, that we want to get done to make sure that we can keep our community safe. So I think removing the preemption that block counties and cities from doing things to make the community safer is also going to be an important step. And then finally, I've been successful in trying to reduce gun violence. This year, I was able to partner with Moms Demand Action, and one of the biggest wins that I had that I didn't already mention was we were able to stop guns in public schools. There was a bill that would have allowed armed people to be serving as school marshals. The bill was supposed to be heard in committee, and I was able to work with Democrats, Republicans, with Moms Demand Action. We had a full room of moms when that bill went up, and the chairman was so scared of hearing all the arguments against it that the bill didn't even go up for a vote. So we're getting better, and I think for the last couple of years, having worked on gun violence since 2011, we've seen a big sea change, because now we're seeing Republicans and Democrats agree on some of these basic pieces of legislation, and we're not seeing as many terrible bills getting passed out of the Arizona legislature that we would have seen 2 or 3 years ago.
Well, that's good news, Daniel. By the way, I want to remind everybody, if you'd like to get in a question before the end of the program, either raise your hands or type a question in the Q&A box. We have a question from Susie Anderson, and she says, Daniel, will there be money for school breakfasts and lunches and classwork projects to be done at home? And do you know how effective and easy for overall students it will be to use the new online curriculums?
Yeah. So this is a very complicated question, unfortunately. So will there be money for school lunch programs? Yes. That is guaranteed by the federal government through programs for low-income children. So those are guaranteed to continue. The way that they will be distributed is kind of still in flux in a lot of places. And what we're seeing is a lot of school districts creating a plan and then immediately coming back and changing those plans. Lucy, I think, can tell you about just in Southern Arizona, the challenges for school districts to make determinations on how they're going to open up versus not opening up. And there seems to be a lot of false starts because we have not come back as a legislature in a special session to address school funding overall. The second question about how will students learn with these new online curriculums, there are going to be some students who are going to thrive in an online environment. But the problem is we have a big digital divide, not just in Southern Arizona, but across the state. What we're seeing is that there are a lot of students who don't have access to things like Wi-Fi. So while all of us are on here today and we're taking advantage of a really great system that allows us to have video conferencing and webinars, there are many communities throughout Arizona, including Santa Cruz County, where broadband connectivity is really low, and there are plenty of people who don't have access to these things. So for many of us, we know that we can work with teachers and provide them training, but most teachers were not trained on how to teach online. So we need to make sure we're putting money into professional development so that teachers are able to effectively use these online tools while we're adjusting to the new normal of being online. Secondly, we need to make sure that we are really providing the additional support and resources for our special needs students. A lot of these kids who have learning developmental disabilities are not receiving the kind of one-on-one care that they need and deserve and are guaranteed by law because of the pandemic. So we need to get creative and figure out how can we safely go into their homes or have better usage of some of this technology. Lastly, I was really proud to work with the Arizona Co-op Association this year to be able to open up broadband connectivity for users who live in areas that are serviced by co-ops, because we know that broadband connectivity, particularly in rural Arizona, is really low, and we need to do more to build that out. So there are a lot of challenges, and there are really different levels, and unfortunately, where you live and the kind of access that you have to additional resources and even some of the basics like Wi-Fi will really determine whether these students will be successful. I've been getting phone calls from people who've told me that they don't have access to Wi-Fi, so the kids at the end of the last semester were going outside of some of the schools and sitting on the sidewalk or sitting out in front of a McDonald's trying to get Wi-Fi to be able to finish their homework. This is not an environment that's conducive to learning. Sunnyside was really revolutionary in using buses that they had that were Wi-Fi enabled as food delivery sites. So what they would do is they would have these buses be set up so families could come and pick up food for their kids, but the students in their own cars could actually be working from their computers and accessing the free Wi-Fi from the school buses. So getting creative is going to be something that we're going to have to do, but I'm really concerned about the students who are the highest risk, who are the highest need, not getting what they deserve and what they're required to by law because of the pandemic. So again, there will be some that will be just fine and will thrive, but we really need to look at how are we providing those tools and resources for the kids who are at the very bottom, who need the most help, so that nobody is getting left behind because of the pandemic.
All right, Daniel, thank you very much. One of our attendees wants to remind everybody that there is a deadline to vote in the primary. And Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it this coming Thursday?
The deadline to register to vote for the upcoming Democratic primary, if you need to update your address, is actually today at midnight.
Oh,
So
today at midnight.
If you've not already changed your registration, if you moved from one place to another, visit servicearizona.com and you can use your driver's license to change your voter registration online today, or you can call the Pima County Recorder's Office and change your voter registration that way. But if you would like to vote in this year's Democratic primary, which is on August 4th, but ballots go out this week, you need to be registered by the end of today if you've changed or moved your address.
All right, thank you, Daniel. That takes care of all of the questions, and I now invite you to sum up and help us close the meeting. Also, be sure to tell us how people can find out more about you and what's the best way for people to support you.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. It's always great to be able to come back to DGT. I've been doing DGT since 2011 when I first ran for the school district, and made sure that I've been working on issues that are close to my heart. So making sure that we're providing additional funding for our public schools in Arizona, fighting for a woman's right to choose and to have access to reproductive health care, making sure that I'm an advocate for the LGBTQ community. So in summation, I've been an effective lawmaker who's able to build bridges and get stuff done for Southern Arizona. I'm in a unique position to be able to actually deliver results, and I want to come back to the Arizona State House because for the first time since the 60s, we can be in the majority, and I can take the things that I've learned, having been in the minority my entire life and my entire career, and really put those tools to use to be able to get results in the next couple of years. So I hope I can continue to earn the support of folks this upcoming Democratic primary on August 4th, to continue being a champion. I've been endorsed by the Arizona Education Association, the Arizona Federation of Teachers, the Arizona Nurses Association, the Professional Firefighters of Arizona, the Teamsters, been endorsed by the Human Rights Campaign. I've been endorsed by Everytown for Gun Safety and Moms Demand Action. I've been endorsed by Planned Parenthood. I build interesting coalitions to get stuff done because I'm somebody that listens more than I talk. I try and find ways to get something done, even if it means not 100% of what I'd like, that I can build up towards a future win that is exactly what we want and need in our communities. So the last thing is, if people aren't already following me on Facebook, Daniel Hernandez AZ, you can follow my page. I just put up our new TV ad, which Lucy texted me about that she saw on MSNBC this last weekend. I'm running for re-election, and I hope that I, along with Senator D'Alessandro, will continue to have your votes and your support. I want to give a special thank you to Sandy Binion for the invitation and for playing phone tag with me for a couple days to get me locked down today. It's always a joy to be with Democrats of Greater Tucson, and hopefully we'll be able to do this in person in the next couple of months.
All right, thank you very much, Daniel. We appreciate all your good work. I, for one, wish you all the best in your campaign and appreciate you being on Democrats of Greater Tucson today. And with that, we're out of time. So I wanted to say thank you to you and so long, everybody.
Have a good day, everyone. Bye-bye.